How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Beyond Physio podcast. I'm Dr. Dave. This is Dr. Alex.
Hey.
Today we're going to go over some buzzwords in terms of fitness, and you might hear around the gym. We want to just clarify some of these definitions and some things that you may not know about some of these topics.
So I think a lot of people, when they go into gym or from their buddies that they work out with, they'll hear things thrown out like a PR or a PB, or, I'm taking a boot camp class or an HIIT class, and nobody,
Some people don't know what that means.
Some people don't know what it is. And also sometimes they're used interchangeably when they don't really mean one specific thing, or it's
used incorrectly.
Exactly.
So, a lot of the holidays are coming around the bend, and during the new year when people make their resolutions, they might be going to the gym. They might hear some of these terms. They might not understand what some of these terms are, or they might be hearing them in the wrong context. So we just want to clarify some of those things. So you want to hit it off with HIIT?
Yeah, sure. So when people say they go to a HIIT class, and there's very different forms of this, but HIIT class, or HIIT, is high intensity interval training. And so basically what that means is you're doing bouts of extreme high intensity exercise interspersed with either complete rest or moderate exercise. And what that does is it kind of brings your system up and it brings your system down over and over again, using something called peripheral heart action. And basically, there's just a fancy word for saying getting your heart to pump very high or high beats per minute, and then very low beats per minute, but to continue to do those exercises. And you can, sustain that for about 30 minutes. I've even heard of some HIIT classes going up to an hour, but that's usually pretty difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Most of my training is somewhere along this lines in terms of HIIT. If the listeners didn't know, actually, Dr. Alex wrote a book literally on HIIT and HIT training. So you guys could actually find that. What's it called?
The Ultimate Guide to HIIT.
Yes, there we go. So you guys could find it on Amazon if you guys want to take a read.
Yeah. But like you were alluding to, it's actually it's a great exercise or program to do if you have a small amount of time, or you're a very busy person.
Exactly. So I like to do it because I usually have 45 minutes to an hour at most in terms of get all my training done for the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to do circuits in an HIIT format. So maybe there's 30 seconds of work, 30 seconds of break. Maybe there is a set rep scheme where I'm doing 20 repetitions of a very particular exercise, and then I'm resting for 30 seconds afterwards. It's a good way to kind of push your fitness, but at the same time, you could kind of modulate how far you're pushing yourself. And especially for those of you that are getting into the fitness game or really trying to elevate your fitness, HIIT is a fantastic way to kind of segue into a more fitness-oriented lifestyle.
And this isn't to be confused with HICT, which is high intensity continuous training.
High intensity continuous training is essentially you do a certain exercise continuously for 30 minutes straight. And I've done these trainings before, and they're really, really brutal. So it's basically every 5 to 8 seconds you do one movement, like a high jump, or something very explosive like a pull-up or a step-up or a bound. But you do it every 5 to 8 seconds for literally 30 minutes straight. And it's, for the first 10 minutes, you're like, oh, this is such a waste of time. It's so boring. By minute 20, you're dead.
Yeah,
you're so dead.
That sounds brutal.
Yeah. And you could make it even harder with a weighted vest, or you could do, you could do a power deadlift where you're lifting a lot of weight every 5 to 8 seconds for 30 minutes straight. It's tough.
And that kind of bridges the gap to HIRT, which is high intensity resistance training. And so now you're taking that template and putting it more towards something for strength and power, where you're adding on the weight and it's increasing the intensity because you're increasing the load. But obviously you're not doing that for 5 hours at a time. Yeah.
Something you could do for 5 hours at a time is something called zone 2 training. Zone 2 training is usually like a cardiovascular exercise, but you're trying to stay within 60 to 70% of your heart rate max. And the way you could calculate your heart rate max for people that have never done this is you take the number 220 minus your age, and that is equal to your heart rate max. So say I'm a 20-year-old person. I'm not a 20-year-old person, but I wish I was. Say I'm a 20-year-old person. You take 220 minus 20, and my heart rate max would be 200. But that's a relative term. I mean, like, I'm 38 years old. My heart rate max is a little bit different from maybe someone that's 38 that's never worked out in their entire life and maybe a little overweight and has some cardiovascular issues. Their heart rate max is going to be different from mine.
Sure, that 220 minus your age is a good place to start, especially if you've never exercised before. That gives you an idea of what your heart rate max is. And like you said, the zone 2 is staying between that 60 to 70%. But a good way to kind of feel that out is another buzzword, or RPE, like rate of perceived exertion. And basically, zone 2 is an exercise or cardio that you should be able to do while working and possibly sweating, but being able to finish a whole sentence. You shouldn't have to gasp. So if someone asks you a question, you're like, oh, well, I'll get to you in a second because I just need to catch my breath. You've passed zone 2. You're now into zone 3 or zone 4. Zone 2 is something where you can speak and go for a brisk walk or a run. And this actually got pretty popular because it's shown great evidence to boost your endurance and your cardiovascular system, but being relatively mild in terms of the intensity.
Yeah, and I think that goes to show that exercise has a lot of different forms. Every workout you do shouldn't be like you feel like you're gonna die afterwards, right? That leads to overtraining. That leads to lack of compliance. Like if after 6 months of working out and every single workouts are super brutal and like you feel super burnt out and like you're dreading working out because you don't like that feeling, you could be exercising at too high of a level or too high of a rate, and you could be burning yourself out. You can be overtraining. So RPE and ZO2 are two ways to figure out what is your rate of exertion. So zone 2 uses like a heart rate monitor or some other mechanism to measure what your exertion is. RPE is your perceived exertion. So say on Tuesday night, you went out drinking with your buddies, and on Wednesday morning, you feel like crap and everything you do feels hard, right? Your perceived exertion during your workout is higher, right? Maybe it's on a scale of 1 to 10. So maybe it feels like everything you do is like an 8 that day, right? But you could do the exact same work on a day that you didn't go drinking with your friends, and the same workout could feel like a 6 that day. So your perceived exertion is lower, right? So rate of perceived exertion, RPE training, is actually something that people are using more and more now, mostly because it does cater to, the nuance between how you feel on Monday and how you feel on Tuesday. There's a lot of subtlety in terms of like how much work can you handle this day and how much work can you handle the next day.
Of course, and environmental factors, how much sleep you got, fluid intake, all that stuff that you have already alluded to will affect it. I'd wonder what my RPE after Thanksgiving dinner is going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be like
lifting my finger is like zone 4. Yeah.
Lifting the gravy bone. I'm like, wow, that's an 8
So
on the
heavy.
RPE scale.
Yeah. So RPE, we talked about rate perceived exertion. Are there other 3-lettered terms or acronyms that you usually get thrown around the gym?
BMI,
Mm-hmm.
right? BMI is body mass index. So body mass index is it's basically an equation of like how much you weigh compared to your height, and it puts you on an index of like, are you like obese? Are you not obese? Are you pre-obesity? Are you fit? And it has proven to be a bit of a false way to measure fitness and health, because a guy like Alex, right, has a lot of muscle, and muscle weighs a lot. So Alex BMI, he might be overweight on the BMI scale, but he is, by far not overweight, and he's very healthy, right? He has a lean body, but his BMI might be off because of his height compared to his weight. It doesn't scale correctly. Especially if you take like a bodybuilder or someone that's like a power lifter, they might be very healthy and fit, but you could also make an argument that not all bodybuilders are healthy.
Yeah. But just the same idea as like a very tall, lanky person, that's going to shift the BMI scales off a little bit. So like you said, it's not a great indicator of fitness or wellness, but it has been, kind of across the board in medicine and with your primary care physician and stuff like that, as just a kind of a marker of like where you sit on that table of obesity or underweight, etc.
One good scale for that might be better than the BMI is something called the InBody. InBody, like you hold on to these things and it like gives you printout of all like where your body fat percentage is and all this other stuff. Also caliper body fat percentage measurements will give you how much, what percentage of your body is fat and what percentage of your body is lean body mass. And then there's other very impractical things like the bod pod that measure, but you're not going to go to Rutgers exercise science department. They're the ones that have the bod pod.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or submergent tanks and stuff like that. But for the average person, I have a scale at home. I just stand on it. It gives me a little electric input on how much it is. It's not very accurate.
Not very accurate, but at least it gives you some sort of data.
Yeah. Another like acronym is DOMS. I think people have heard like, oh, like don't do that, you'll get DOMS, and that sounds very scary. Or Rhabdo, like those are two things that throw out like what are those two things. Mm-hmm. So DOMS actually stands for delayed onset muscle soreness.
4 letters.
Yeah, and delayed. So muscle soreness or delay of muscle soreness is actually. That's pretty common. I mean, you exercise one day, the next day, potentially you're a little sore. DOMS is when it comes to that 48-hour period where it's not the next day, but the day after that, that's actually the soreness has even increased. And this goes back to what you were talking about with overtraining, where you want to be able to test your body in the way that you get those physical adaptations that help you get stronger, help build muscle, help build bone, tendon strength, all that stuff. But you don't want to do it so much that now you're taking away from other exercises or their next bout of exercise 2 days, 3 days out. Mm-hmm. If you're still sore, you're now losing ground because your muscles and your tendons and everything have been hit so hard that they can't actually work as well, 3 days afterwards. So DOMS is something you should try to avoid, but it's not necessarily, the
worst thing in the world.
Right, a scary thing that's coming your way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the delay in the delayed onset muscle soreness is that what Dr. Alex was alluding to is that it usually will hit you 2 days later.
Yeah.
So you might do a workout and like the next day you might feel fine. You're like, oh, that was fine. And then the next day you could barely walk down the stairs. That's DOMS. And that's actually an indication that you probably pushed it a little bit too far. Mm-hmm. But especially the people that we're alluding to, people that might be getting into the fitness game or have never really worked out before, almost everything you do in that first couple weeks is going to make you feel destroyed. Mm-hmm. Mostly because you're not adapted to a lot of the exercise you might do. By week 3, a lot of the DOMS are going to go away and you're going to feel much better. The most important thing with DOMS, hydration, protein intake, sleep, stretch. Like you have to do those things. Or the DOMS are gonna
DOMS are gonna get you.
They're gonna be brutal.
Yeah.
And I know I've been there. I've been there with you guys. So don't be afraid of it, but it's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm. And that was the term that I threw out before when we were talking about DOMs that sometimes gets mixed up with rhabdo. And so rhabdo is just a shortened version of rhabdomyolysis. And that's actually a very dangerous condition where basically your body can't process the amount of muscle breakdown that has happened, and it actually can screw up your
life threatening.
It screws up your liver and kidneys. So that can actually be very dangerous. But that's more than just a focal muscle ache 2 days later.
Yeah,
we're talking about discolored urine. We're talking about pain everywhere.
Yeah.
Like your entire body feels extremely sore.
Trust me, if you have rhabdo, if you have rhabdo, you know you have rhabdo. Like you're in the ER. That's how bad rhabdo is. So yeah, don't mistake DOMs with rhabdo. That's not it.
Mm-hmm.
Rhabdo, you're in the ER. You can't function as a person, and it's actually life-threatening. So it's very dangerous. That only happens if you push yourself beyond your physical capability times 10. Like people can do this to themselves, but it's very difficult. And I'm kind of respecting people that could push themselves to the point where they get rhabdo, because that takes a lot of mental fortitude. And yeah, I wouldn't be, for people that are getting into the fitness game, don't worry that you're going to get rhabdo. You're not going to get rhabdo.
Yeah, there's only a few things that like kind of contributed to it. Some people who get rhabdo are the people who have had a high fitness level, but they've taken a break for like a good long time, but remember where they were, and so they try to go back to an exercise without progressing with taking that break. So they jump back into like, oh, I used to be able to do this 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and they'll just go and work out again. Also, people who are on statins seem to get rhabdo more. And then, of course, we already talked about if you're dehydrated, you've already set yourself up for failure. But again, like we were saying, it's a very dangerous condition, but it's not very common. And you would have to push yourself very, very hard. Typically, your body exhausts before you even get anywhere close to that level.
Absolutely. Yeah. So another thing that's kind of a hot button topic is something called blood flow restriction. Blood flow restriction we do in the clinic, but we do it with very specialized equipment. It kind of looks like a blood pressure cuff, and it inflates, and there's a computer within this apparatus that kind of gauges what your blood flow is. So the theory behind blood flow restriction, and it's been very deeply researched as being very beneficial in terms of hypertrophy, which is the growth in size of the muscle, and strength. You get those gains in terms of size and strength much quicker than if you had not done the blood flow restriction. So a lot of times you'll see in the gym, like guys will just like wrap voodoo bands and stuff around their biceps. Don't do that. Like, do not do that. That's dangerous. You could cause vascular injuries. You could cause a blood clot within your own body. But the equipment that we use in the clinic is very specialized in that it compresses just the amount that it needs to and not more. When you're wrapping a voodoo band around your arm or your leg, you don't know how much you're occluding. You can't control that.
There's no Doppler in that little rubber band strap or those things that you buy on Amazon where you just tourniquet yourself as much as possible. There are some bands that I've seen where you can see the blood pressure meter on there and press it, and that is better than tourniqueting yourself with like a rubber band or one of those. However, number one, it's not individualized to you, so you need to know your own blood pressure, and it's not your blood pressure typically for your heart and your system, but per limb.
Yeah.
And then also on top of it, it starts to stretch out and it loses pressure and things like that. So yes, this has made its way into the bodybuilding and the gym scene because it's so effective. BFR is fantastic, and so many clinical trials have proven that it works. But like you said, you need the proper equipment, otherwise potentially you're just doing damage to yourself and you're not seeing any of those gains that you're supposed to get with that.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing is that you just need to make sure that you're going to the gym and you're doing it safely, right? You want to reach your goals, whether you're a New Year's resolution kind of person. You want to reach your goals, but you want to do it in a way that's sustainable and safe for you in the long term. So, doing HICT training or HIIT training, or doing blood flow restriction, or zone 2, all these things are to help people reach their goals. And these are some buzzwords that you might hear. You want to just make sure that you understand what some of these terms are, you understand where their place is, and how it might help you in the future to actually get you to do what you want to be able to do.